University, even if virtually. The tulips are in bloom, and I'm glad you could all join me this morning. I'm Special Associate Professor Scott Jeffries, and I'm here to talk with you this morning about an interesting topic and a relevant topic to all of us in these current coronavirus days. We're going to talk about safe at home and what it means to be safe at home, with us all having transitioned to working from remote locations around the globe, and specifically what it means to every one of you and your cybersecurity profile. We'll do about 15 minutes or so of my talk telling you some of the current trends and some of the things we're observing. And then we'll open up the YouTube live chat for everybody to submit questions, and we'll take them one-on-one. So let's make it an interactive conversation. Grab yourself a cup of coffee like I have here, enjoy yourself, and here we go. Let's talk a little bit, okay? Let me share my screen out to you, and here we go. All right, so again, the idea of today is to talk about what it means to be safe at home and the changing profile of the home network and what it means to you, for many of you who are watching from remote locations around the globe. So to motivate today's conversation, I thought we'd start with some recent media headlines, because that really is the genesis of where we've been over the last 4 weeks, at least here in the Hofstra campus area, but realistically since December and January across the globe. First thing we have to recognize is that school systems and institutions of higher education like Hofstra University have literally pivoted the entire method of delivering education in the last 4 weeks. We've run into lots of troubles, and we've run into things that have been surprisingly wonderful. But the point is that shift probably has left an impact on education for years to come. So that's going to be a motivating element of what it means to us being safe at home going forward. Secondly, we've had statewide stay-at-home orders in a variety of states issued, a little bit sporadically in locations outside of the northeastern United States, but they have been rolling across the United States in general. So these idea of stay-at-home orders, where we're now forced to be inside our house, not only with our children, but that means with our adult parents, our brothers, our sisters, etc. We now have a completely different security profile in our homes, with a myriad of devices that you never thought of being attached to your home network. Not only is your Google Home and your Alexa devices attached, but now everybody's phone is attached, everybody's iPad, everybody's Kindle device, everybody's mobile device. Internet of Things becomes a real relevant topic to us now. So as a result, your home network has now become in some ways more complex than the actual corporate networks that you are attached to. So as a result, it's something we're going to want to pay attention to this morning. The third thing is that we've come up now against the world of synchronous and asynchronous infrastructures. Are we just pointing people to videos to go and look at after the fact, or are we having interactive discussions with one another? And as a result, a lot of businesses, including a lot of universities, were not prepared to take this step, to be honest with you. So business continuity plans, how we keep the business running, how we keep education running, has been put to the test over the last 4 weeks like never before. And in order to meet that challenge, we've been rushing to provide tools into the education environment specifically that allows us to continue our role with you here at Hofstra University. And in some cases around the globe, that expedited move to online education has left little time for security testing, and even less for things to be rolled into a production environment. So we'll talk a little bit about that, about what it means for you at home and how you can protect yourself. And finally, the most recent headline, which many of you have seen in the last week or so, is that we're seeing national security agencies such as the FBI raising security concerns in the video conferencing space, in the domain registration space, and more broadly in healthcare, flagging the fact that those nefarious characters interested in taking advantage of the COVID-19 infection rate across the globe are finding ways to potentially monetize this disease, and we all need to be vigilant and aware of that. So, as a home worker, there's some warnings that you have, all right? And these are some of the headlines that have crossed the globe just within the last 48 hours. An investor in Zoom, somebody who actually bought stock, has now filed a class action lawsuit against the company, accusing it of fudging details about its encryption, hiding security flaws, and disclosing personal information. So already we're finding ourselves with this Zoom tool that we're so interested in using and has been such a valuable bridge to keeping us connected, not only professionally, but keeping us connected with family and friends so that we still have somewhat of a personal touch. Suddenly now we're finding Zoom in the middle of the lawsuit environment. Over in the UK, for those of you watching from overseas, the domain registration company Nominet is specifically managing .uk websites, and they have had to step up their efforts significantly to prevent scams that are being proliferated against the public by selling things like fake vaccines, fake PPE systems or environments, right? Fraud remedies, etc. So as a result, sites are coming up everywhere around the globe from people who are desperate to find answers, desperate to find solutions. So in my mind, what better time to be attached to something like Hofstra University when fear is scaring us and we don't have answers? What better time to stay attached to a university, to work with the faculty, to work with each other, to do research, to actually engage in finding answers and getting qualified information? Then finally, the last bullet on this slide, which is even more interesting, is that Europol overseas has arrested a man for allegedly attempting to launder cash through a business email scam connected to the coronavirus. The point here is that as a home worker, you are going to be victimized by more spear phishing campaigns than ever before. And if you're not familiar with spear phishing, we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes, but it's something you're going to have to be aware of as a home worker. So we're talking today for three specific reasons. There's a heightened dependency on infrastructure, digital infrastructure now, that raises the risk profile of failure and breach impact. In other words, when we were all attached on Hofstra's network and happily running inside the walls of the Ivy University, all right, we were doing wonderful things attached to Hofstra's network, and we were guaranteed that our IT personnel were protecting our laptops on that network. But now we're sitting outside of that boundary. And as a result, we have the responsibility for making sure our own connectivity, our wireless connectivity, our home networks, etc., are sufficiently resilient to avoid being taken down by an outside source, and what's more, to avoid infection. And we have to worry about our own hardware now potentially having a failure. Suppose your router were to fail. Suppose your wireless connections were to fail. Now suddenly you're offline and disconnected from work. So we need to be concerned about that. Cybercrime headlines are exploiting fear everywhere. It's no laughing matter that if you're here in New York, you watch the daily updates that come from Governor Cuomo here in New York, and all you see is numbers going up theoretically. There have been more infections, more deaths. Hopefully we're now on the right side of that trend, and that will continue for us, but we still face an uphill battle in the coming months. And that fear that everybody's feeling is being exploited. So you're having a digital exploit of a biological risk. Those two don't seem connected, but there's nothing better for a cyber terrorist than exploiting the fear of a situation, telling you where the fear is and telling you what you should do about it. So we need to be very concerned about that. And finally, the third issue that I want to raise to everybody's attention as part of today's discussion is that we're home. I'm home, you're home, and in theory, we're going to feel like we have more free time on our hands than normal. Yes, we should be working all the time, etc., but no longer are we in the office where we can grab a cup of coffee at the water cooler or stop by our colleague's cubicle to have a quick conversation, stop by the neighbor's dorm room, maybe grab a meal together. So as a result, we're finding ourselves with more and more free time on our hands that we're looking to fill in terms of entertainment value. And this can lead to riskier internet access practices. You may wind up going to a site that you may not normally think about going to. We'll talk about preventing that kind of behavior and specifically the governance that goes around it. So the first thing you have to understand in what we're facing in cybersecurity is that there is a huge economic motivation behind those who are trying to harvest our credentials and steal information from us. If you remember the old joke, somebody asked Jesse James why he always robs banks, and Jesse James' response was very simple. He said, "That's where they keep the money." All right, if you think about the economic motivation here, a huge amount of capital exists here in the United States. And as a result, offshore cyber terrorists are interested in getting access to those funds in any way possible. So as a result, we have to be especially resilient here in the United States to be aware of our security profiles. And very specifically, more and more cyber terrorists are look at the highlighted element on this slide, higher return on investment. They're looking to hit high profile targets to try to extract money from not only individuals, but universities and corporations who they may have infected to be able to get the services back up and running. School districts are particular targets here in the New York area and across the country as we're chasing the latest educational technology. And we have to ask ourselves, do we have the actual IT staff to support all of those technologies? Every school district has to answer that for themselves. Certainly Hofstra spends a great deal of time worried about our security profile and the like. But here's the fact, all right? The research that's being done by myself and my colleague organization at AMSTO suggests that we may have as many as double the number of attacks on school districts in August of 2020, just before we get ready to go back to school, should we be going back to school this coming September. We need to think about these things because the infection rate or the cyber infection rate is only going to increase from here. It's not going to decrease because of the economic motivation. So in the rush to come home and work from home, okay, again, you are now responsible for your home network and endpoint security, and that has to be managed inside the home. What does that mean? It means that you should be making sure that your antivirus software on your endpoint is up to date. If you're a Microsoft Windows user, be sure that you have the latest signatures, that Windows Defender is properly configured. If you're a Mac user, despite the fact that many folks think Macs are not infectable, be sure that you have some sort of security profile and protection available for yourself. All right. If you have a mobile device, such as a cell phone and the like, be very careful of what applications you're downloading at this time. Be careful of when you're connecting to stores. All of these new world items represent risk profile for you in the home. You're not going to have an IT staff available to help you fix it. You're running your own network now. So as a result, be aware of that. Most organizations have a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity strategy now to cope with predictable catastrophes, right? Such as what happens if a building should have a power outage, what happens if a building has some sort of explosion. Okay, these are the types of things that I plan for in business, but there are things now that I haven't even thought about in terms of commercial risk. And I list 4 of them there just to think about them, okay? First is the business versus the family computer. Right now, the computer I'm speaking to you over here in my home is business critical for everything I'm doing in my organization with Hofstra and beyond the Hofstra walls. The point is this really the computer that I should be using now to be running games on? Should I be playing Candy Crush Saga or something like that on this PC? Do I need to be running those extra apps on this PC? Or should I recognize the fact that this is my lifeline now to my business and my ongoing education interest, right? So it's something you should think about, okay? The second thing is cell phone applications, right? There are a huge number of COVID-19 applications now being available in various locations, and certainly the various stores are having a very difficult time keeping up on what's valid and what's not. Be sure you do your research before you start downloading applications right now. This is a critical time for all of us. I mentioned earlier, be sure that your anti-malware software is up to date. If you haven't had anti-malware software before, now might be a good time to take another look at it. And finally, for those of you running wireless networks at home, it may be obvious if you're technology savvy, it may be less obvious if you're not. Be sure those networks are password protected at this point. You don't want anybody accidentally stumbling onto your network and leveraging your resources, or worse yet, infecting your network, trying to probe your other devices on the network. All right. So cyber attacks globally are increasing rapidly, and I've chosen 2 of them to highlight. Last month, in the Czech Republic, a hospital which was serving as a COVID-19 testing center was hit with a cyber attack in the middle of a coronavirus outbreak, forcing some of their services to be shut down. And some of those services involved patient care. It wasn't just payroll or admin functions. It actually had something to do with the patients themselves. So you can imagine the panic that not only causes among the nursing staff and the doctor staff, but just in general in terms of patient care. And there are some DDoS attackers or denial of service attackers that are literally using this as an opportunity to run extortion campaigns against organizations by trying to flood their servers or their edge servers with traffic loads to try to take them offline, seeking payment to turn off those denial of service attacks. So as a result, things that we never had to worry about as a university suddenly now are front and center for us. What would happen, for example, if Hofstra.edu or our Blackboard system should become absolutely inundated with a denial of service attack, such that we can't even stay in touch with each other for hours, days, maybe weeks at a time? These are the types of vulnerabilities that we now suddenly find ourselves exposed to. Now, as a home user, what can you do about any of this, okay? And I've specifically called this slide the defense against the dark arts. And there's our friend Severus Snape in the background to remind us what we should be doing. And I've got 4 ideas for all of you today that I wanted to share of things that you can do proactively at home to improve your security profile. First, okay, update your software to the newest version as soon as possible to help prevent the use of previously unpatched versions of software. All right. So for those of you that have been getting update messages from various applications you're using and you've been hesitant to go and apply that update, now might be a good time, because there may be security patches in there that will help prevent you against vulnerabilities. The second thing is verify that your security software itself is running and it's up to date. Whether you're running Symantec or McAfee or whatever product you've chosen for your security profile, be sure it's active, be sure it's running on your laptop. The easiest way to do it is if you're on Windows, you'll see it running in the tray at the bottom of your Windows 10 screen. All right. The third thing, goodness knows that it seems like the disaster always happens to a PC when we're in the middle of this type of emergency. And there's no better time to think about backing up your own files and your own work files, your own Hofstra University files, and just your entire environment. There's no better time to do that backup than right now. And specifically, I always like to tell people when I'm working with them, think about the 3-2-1 rule. Be sure you have at least 3 copies of your core data. Okay, be sure those copies are stored in 2 different formats. You could store one of them on a floppy disk, not a floppy disk, on a USB. You could do it on a floppy disk if you wanted, an external drive. However, it should be in 2 different media sources that you can leverage. And be sure at least one of those copies is stored off-site. And when I say off-site, I just mean outside of your house. Put it in your car glove compartment if you want, okay? You know, lock it away in the glove compartment. Put it in the garage so it's separated from the rest of the house, okay? As a result, you have multiple backups you can go back to should something happen to your PC in any way, shape, or form. And finally, the last one that I'm going to spend some time on with you is be very aware, now that you're at home, okay, of suspicious emails that are attempting to contact you to revise credentials, to ask you to verify your account, to ask you information about your account status or transactions. Be very, very careful about these, because right now the phishing attacks that are taking place are off the charts in terms of numbers. They've more than tripled in the last 4 weeks. So be aware that we're all going to be targets of these things. So what does a suspicious email look like? Now, obviously, if it comes from somebody and the subject line is in a language you don't understand, that's one type of example. If it's written in a font you can't even recognize, that's another example. But I wanted to give some more interesting and more concrete examples, which is the kind of thing I have on my slide right now. Some of the things you can look for in your email before you start clicking around and looking at various links in the email. Take a look at this first one. Notice the return address in this particular one. This is an email that supposedly came from Doug Williams. Notice his email address that's embedded here as part of the message header, okay? Certainly, it doesn't look like an email address that Doug Williams would have, particularly if it's coming from a business address. So as a result, that's the first flag. Be sure you know where you're sending the response to. Secondly, notice the conflicts that I have here in the circle, okay? Whoever, the individual that received this email is being addressed, hi, John Gadaska, okay? As in theory, you've got a friendly relationship with the individual, but you've used the whole name of the person. In other words, if I'm talking to a friend, I would have said just hi, John, or something like that. Instead, I've got the last name in here. So that's trying to convince you somehow that, hey, we're friends, we can talk to one another, but the software didn't actually work properly to just chop off the last name. Take a look at the inside of the email body here. Notice it's saying, you know, you've apparently overlooked paying our particular invoice, and there's some number there. If you've got a bill and you've paid it before, you're either going to recognize where it was from in the last month, or you're probably going to recognize the type of invoice number that you're going to have. So be careful about this. And more than anything, just take a second. You can see I have my mouse on the slide right now. Just take a second and hover over that link. Just leave your mouse there for 2 seconds. That's all it takes, is 2 seconds. And most browsers and most email systems will pop up a link that shows you where that link is associated to. What is the domain name that it goes to? So if you're getting an email about some sort of banking issue and you hover over your Citibank account number, and somehow that's launching you to a site in Russia or in Denmark, okay, suddenly that should be a flag to you that this is not a valid link. What's more, if you're getting similar emails that's asking you for a revision of your credentials, verify your username and password, verify your phone number, stop and think, okay? Does your bank really need to get your username and phone number and password right now? Or is it a scam trying to get you to re-give those credentials? Here's my recommendation. Before you offer any of that information, just don't. In this particular time, while we're all working from home, just back away from it, okay? Save it away, save it for a week or two. The world's not going to come to an end if you just leave it there. And chances are what you'll find is that you've done the right thing by not offering those credentials. Okay, so those are some advice, some tips of what you can do at home to try to protect yourself and try to protect your family. Remember, with all the devices now attaching to our home network, we've got more and more responsibility ourselves between our own four walls that we have to care for. And I hope this was useful. So at this point, you can use the YouTube live chat channel underneath your screen to submit any questions, and I'd be happy to continue the interactive discussion with you. So Carla, back to you if there are any questions coming through. Okay, so the first question comes to us and says, should I always use a VPN and avoid public Wi-Fi at all times? As a security practice, it's generally a bad idea to be using public Wi-Fi. Just because you don't know who's sitting on the other side of this. Very often I'm asked this question in terms of airport networks, for example. In fact, we really don't know who's sitting on the other side of that network. So your best security profile is to avoid public Wi-Fi, particularly at times like this. As far as a VPN, that's a great practice to use. For those of you familiar with VPN software, you can actually create a virtual private network, which makes it more difficult for your machine to be identified and information to be harvested. So that's always a good practice that you could have. Any other questions? Okay, another question has just come in. Are different devices more or less secure? For example, is my iPhone less secure than my laptop or my laptop to my iPad? Which is a great question. Here's the best way of thinking about it. If you're not running defensive software on your endpoint, okay, meaning virus protection software on your iPad or your desktop, the chances are that you are more exposed than you would be otherwise, right? So does that necessarily mean you've been attacked? No. But are you going out in the world without a code on? Yes, you're allowing your device to be impacted. And as a result, okay, you do run a certain risk. So whatever endpoint device you're using, whether it's a mobile device, an IoT device, or your actual laptop, you should be investigating what security settings and what security profiles you can use associated with that device. So always be sure you're aware of your security posture. Another question that comes in, I tend to access my apps and subscriptions like newspapers and magazines through my Facebook account. Is that a security risk? I'm assuming that the person asking this question is that you've got your username and password, or your credentials from your Facebook account being used to authorize your access to those sites. If we trust Facebook authentication, which is reasonable to trust at this point, then it's a perfectly valid way for us to be authenticating ourselves to a particular site to be able to get news, etc. Is it possible that those credentials could be misused inside of Facebook or with a nefarious user? Sure, it's possible, but that would be in my list of things to worry about, that would be low profile. That would be a low attack target. Very hard to see how that could be monetized by an attacker at this point. But at the end of the day, you should be safe. I wouldn't worry about that one. Are social platforms secure, and should we avoid them entirely? I'll take the second part first, okay? Should we avoid them entirely? Well, if you're spending 10 hours a day on Facebook, the chances are you should be taking that down a notch, right? If you're spending 5 hours a day tweeting out various things, you probably should take that down a notch. Are social platforms inherently secure? The companies that are dealing with social platforms, such as Facebook, such as Twitter, Instagram, etc., have teams dedicated to guaranteeing the security of the network. And they work very hard to make sure that credentials, usernames, passwords, credit cards, addresses, social security numbers, if they're harvested, are not accidentally distributed. Do breaches happen? Sure, they happen everywhere. Target has had major breaches over time. You've certainly seen them in the news when you've seen the stories about the Equifax breach, etc. So the point is, okay, we have to assume that the social platforms are doing everything possible to protect our security. If you are afraid of your credentials being shared, don't put them out on Facebook. And let me just put that in context one more in a slightly different way. There's none of us who doesn't like seeing the cute memes that are on the internet saying, you know, respond with your favorite month of the year, respond with what year you graduated high school, respond, you know, these kinds of questions, right? It's usually a cute little character meme and everybody's in a rush to answer it. But the problem with that, of course, is we're giving away that information on our social network. So if I were to ask you directly, face to face, hey, let me ask you a question. What was the name of your 6th grade elementary school teacher? You'd look at me with a tilted head and say, why in God's name would you want that information, right? But somehow, some reason, if I ask you that on Facebook, you're more than willing to type in the answer to me. And the problem with this, of course, is very often these types of questions are banking security questions. So I have taken the approach myself that I don't get involved in those meme type questions. I don't answer them at all. To show you how they can be reverse engineered, if you say what year you graduated from high school, they now have your birth year in theory within a year or two. So as a result, you're giving away information about yourself that you didn't intend to. So just be careful before you do the Facebook meme quizzes and the like. Those are something that I tend to stay away from a security perspective. Everybody's asking you a question for a reason, okay? And if you don't know why they're asking you the question, just don't answer it. That's your most secure option. Let's see what else we have. Does having multiple emails help with cybersecurity? In other words, different email addresses for different activities, one for shopping, one for work, one for personal conversations. Well, if you can certainly segregate your mails from that perspective, it doesn't hurt, right? As I mentioned earlier, I talked about the idea of your business laptop, the one I'm talking to you now from. Is this really the laptop that I want to be running games on at this point? Is this really the laptop that I want to be doing, Facebook on, etc.? I admit it's more expensive, and it represents an issue. Right now, I've got one laptop for work, I've got one laptop for home, and naturally, you've got two devices now that you're managing. Oh, I'm on the wrong laptop. I just want to check out my Facebook profile. I get the inconvenience. But right now, we're in a situation from a cybersecurity perspective where our main laptop or our main email system is our access to the world to continue on with our careers, etc. So as a result, I personally have taken the approach that I'm trying to segment my work between a personal laptop used for fun and games and my business laptop, which is where I'm talking to you from today. You may want to think about the same. That doesn't mean I'm suggesting that you go out and spend $2,000 for another laptop or $1,500. I'm not trying to, hawk up sales and computers or individual devices. It's just something to think about. So turning it back to your email addresses, yeah, I would suggest that your business email is kept for business. Okay, I would suggest that your social email with friends is kept for that. And I would suggest that a third email address, which is used for what I'll call website registrations, whether you're registering for a coupon site or you're registering for rebates at something like that, I would keep that as a third potential email, just because you don't want all the spam that comes with it and all the management. Remember, a lot of the coupon sites, etc., one of their terms of service that you may not be paying attention to is they resell these emails, right, as part of their commercial offering. And by getting a free service from them, you agree to have your email used that way. So I'd be careful about giving away your business email address specifically on that one. Keeping the conversation going. What's the difference between a virus, malware, and ransomware? Great question, and right to the heart of what I talk about. Malware is generally the new word that's used. It's the broad overarching category for everything that goes out to attack your PC. So malware encompasses viruses, spyware, and ransomware. We generally put that all under the bucket of malware. Malware comes from the idea of software, meaning software is the actual programs we run. Mal meaning bad as a prefix. It's bad software that's running on our box that's launched. The issue with ransomware is particularly interesting because ransomware is specifically designed to trick you or fool you into clicking on a site through a phishing scam that downloads a piece of software to your physical device that actually encrypts the material or encrypts the hard disk in such a way that you can't anymore see what's on that disk. And typically, that ransomware now preys on your fear of getting that data back. So as a result, when the ransomware encrypts your software, okay, or encrypts your hard disk rather, not just software, we now have the problem of how do we unencrypt it? And this is the idea that you'll see in literature, or if you've ever experienced it, goodness knows, okay, where somebody's seeking Bitcoin payment from you to actually unencrypt your disk. Now, there are really two problems with this. The first is, what kind of site did you stumble across that this happened? Okay, the damage is done, okay? The real problem is that even if you can figure out how to transfer the Bitcoin to this anonymous site, these are nefarious characters. There's no guarantee that the individual on the other side is actually going to unencrypt your hard disk once you give them the payment. So in fact, it could be like a drive-by accident where somebody comes, they encrypt your disk, you panic, you try to send them the $300 or $500, et cetera, that they're looking for in terms of payment to unencrypt your disk. Who do you call if they don't do it, right? There's nobody on the other end per se. This is why the attack that took place in August of 2019 against the Rockville Center School District is a great case study in this. Rockville Center, as some of you might know, it's a school district here on Long Island. And in August 2019, they were struck by a ransomware attack that locked up some key student servers that held student records, which were critical to the operation of the school district, which was launching in 1 week's time. So if you're wondering why those who launch ransomware attacks attack school districts in August, it's because you're on a time-critical path at this point. You only have about a week before school starts to get those systems up and running. In the case of Rockville Center, they paid a tremendous fee, approximately $88,000, which was recouped through insurance. But at the end of the day, $88,000 was paid to some blind offshore account in Bitcoin. And in their particular case, they were fortunate in that the folks on the other side did unencrypt their servers. But in speaking with the folks at Rockville Center, you can be absolutely sure that they have put up a brand new security posture for themselves, certainly exemplary on Long Island. Again, it only has to happen once, and that's the scary part. Any other questions? Okay. Should I avoid geotags? And do geotags on social posts create a security risk? Great question. Let me offer you my thoughts on this, right? Not only geotags, but let me talk about tagging in general. A very good friend of mine over this past summer had secured a reservation at one of the really elite restaurants in Manhattan. Just absolutely stunning restaurant. I won't name my friend. I won't name, he's my very best friend. I won't name anything about it. He happens to live up in Westchester. So he was very excited about getting the ability to go to this restaurant with his wife and a couple other friends. And throughout the evening, he was taking pictures of his meal, taking pictures of the waiter, etc., and sharing those throughout the evening on Facebook. It turns out, unbeknownst to him, that he had been the potential target of a home invasion, okay? And those who were seeking to ransack his home actually were following his Facebook account, saw the fact that he was not at home, and therefore knew exactly where he was in the process of having his meal, so they could actually take their time in ransacking his house to be able to rob him of several $100,000 worth of material. Okay. And it's because he was specifically saying, here I am at this point, I'm not home and I'm living a better life than you. Okay, that kind of bravado is what led to his home invasion situation. So the point is, the idea of doing geotagging and saying where you are within the globe, to me, represents a bad idea. Okay, I get that everybody wants to share photos when they're out on vacation. Why advertise that you're not home? Okay, you can share those same photos the way we did in the Kodak and Polaroid days. Wait until you're home for a couple of days, and then you can share them with everybody. Let's face it, it's not going to matter at the end of the day whether you share them today or you share them a week from now. You're just trying to share memories with people after the fact. So just keep that in mind. Any other questions? Let's see. If my data is breached, what should I do? What steps should I take to resecure my information online? Well, I don't know specifically which data you're talking about, but let's say, I'll give you a couple of examples, okay? If somebody has harvested, for whatever reason, a Word document from your file, from your machine, I'm not particularly concerned unless that Word document contains social security numbers, credit card information, etc. If you're involved with a commercial institution that has been breached, let's say your bank, or let's say someplace that you have a credit card, your first course of action is obviously to contact the vendor. And I always recommend immediately putting a freeze on all of your Equifax and similar accounts. All right. In other words, freeze your credit at that point to avoid any potential use of those credit card numbers. Again, on the black market, on the dark web, these credit cards are sold. The more information they have about you related to your card number, the expiration date, etc., the more likely they are to be used. So if you are breached, and that's a security issue, that's a credit card issue, etc., I would specifically be involved with the institution. Not exactly sure what other data you might be keeping on your local machine that's secure, that might be breached. I'd be, again, more concerned about the institutional breaches, and that requires you to stay in touch with the institution itself. What steps should I take when that happens? Again, contact the institution, change your passwords often with these online banking sites and the like. Do not necessarily cache them locally. See if you can build the discipline to have either a password vault library on your local machine, or if you don't have one of those, keep a diary or black book in your home with some of the major passwords. Or you can just try to remember them. And as a result, if you can't, you have to go through an authentication sequence. Sometimes the best way of doing this is what's called two-factor authentication, where not only you put in the password, but the host site sends you a text message afterwards that says you have to supply this 6-digit key or whatever to gain access to the site. Two-factor authentication is taking off with a lot of banking sites and the like. It's a worthwhile implementation. Let's see, I have another question here. Do you think cyber insurance gives businesses and something was coming off of that. Do I think I'll try to complete it. What do I think about cyber insurance and the like? Cyber insurance is a growing trend in the industry by and large, okay? And there are substantial premiums currently that are marked up because the insurance companies don't actually understand what their full potential downside is at this point. So for example, I gave you the issue with Rockville Center earlier, where their insurance company, because they had cybersecurity insurance for their infrastructure, they were able to recoup their funds and therefore not impact student education. However, an institution that didn't have that kind of protection now suddenly is exposed to a fee or a charge that they might not have expected, and it might impact student education and the like. So it is something to be aware of. Does it give business I'm going to try to complete your sentence here. Does it give businesses a sense of security or a false sense of security? I hope not, because just like I have car insurance, right? Car insurance is protecting me from hitting others or others from hitting me. I don't drive more or less recklessly knowing that I have car insurance. So too in the cyber world, you shouldn't be more or less reckless with your infrastructure or your devices, thinking to yourself, if it goes wrong, somebody else will pay the bill, because you're forced to have the inconvenience. You have to worry about how you're going to be reconnected. In the car world, we'd have a rental car. What do we do in the laptop world? We cobble together some sort of infrastructure that allows us to keep working, etc. So I wouldn't use cybersecurity insurance as a safety net, thinking I can just parade through the internet like it's the Wild West. I'd actually be very concerned about using it that way. Just use it as a business continuity measure, if anything else. Any other questions? What are your top worst passwords to use? My top worst password to use is Scott Jeffries. I don't want to use that as a password. I don't want to use Scott. I don't want to use my last name. Welcome 123 is the classic one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you do an internet search every year, the various cybersecurity companies will do some sort of end of year wrap up with the worst passwords that exist and the like. Okay, the ones that come with the default of the PC, welcome 123, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, your name, your dog's name, things like that. Those are typically the worst passwords to be using. If you're looking to construct a more secure password, remember that you should use both uppercase and lowercase. So instead of using just 26 lowercase characters, we've now got 26 uppercase, 26 lowercase. That gives us 52 characters to choose from. Be sure that you use some digits in there, 0 through 9. That gives us another 10 characters to use. That gives us now 62 characters to choose from. Don't be afraid to use some of the symbolic characters, the @ sign, the exclamation point, the %sign, the $sign, where they're allowed by various systems and the like. That increases us to maybe 70 or 75 typable characters to use. Every step that you take to increase the number of characters that you can sample a password from significantly increases the difficulty that it takes for a cyber criminal to guess your password. We could go through lots of explanations using discrete math on that, but just take it from me. The more you can use upper and lower case, the more you can use a digit or two and maybe a special character, the more secure your password will be. The more secure it is by actually obfuscating what the character is. Any other questions? Okay, so I just got word that that looks like it's the set of questions from the group. I thank you all for joining me today. Here's what the point of today's session was, okay? We're living in naturally fearful times with the coronavirus. And as a result, that fear tends to drive us into certain behaviors, okay? And it could be that we're in the home more, and as a result, we're doing things or visiting sites we might not normally do, okay? Instead of being fearful about it, let's take an educated approach. Let's go forward and actually secure our home networks, make sure our antivirus software is working, make sure we know all the devices that are attached to our network, and be prepared to operate in this environment probably for a few more weeks, hopefully not much longer, but it could be a few more months. So remember that we own the responsibility of that security at this point when we're operating outside of our corporate walls. I thank you very much for joining me today for this coffee chat. I look forward to meeting with you sometime soon. And for those of you on campus, I look forward to being back with you at Hofstra University sometime soon, so we can all enjoy the tulips together. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.